1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in at the DFS lab. As always, this show presented by 1 week season, where we build a lineup on DraftKings and look at it, just use it as a way to talk through the upcoming slate. In this case, we're going to look at the 2-game slate that will be tomorrow. By the way, Merry Christmas Eve to everyone. I'm sure you guys are trying to get all your ducks in a row with the last minute everything for Christmas. So glad you could be with us. I'm your host, Cheeseman, and I'm welcoming up Hilow. And Hilow, are you ready for Christmas? Do you feel ready, or you just got a couple last minute things?
Probably not all the way ready. I don't know if you ever are, like, as a parent, to be honest.
Exactly.
My office is currently the staging room for all the presents and stuff. So like, I had to move shit out of the way to even make room, because I have like my podcast station like set up on a mobile unit, so it's on a cart.
Oh wow, that's
so
smart.
I have like all my shit, my light, my camera, my microphone, and then like soundproofing, and it's all on this cart. So I move it out of the way like when I'm not podcasting, and the rest of the room was just filled with presents. So I had to like shuffle shit around and move everything to roll out my cart. But yeah,
that is
I don't
so
know, man.
awesome, dude.
Yeah,
the things you would never
good.
know, like the setup behind, like, because all of us, there's so many different people who are producing content, and it's like, you have a cart. What is someone else's setup? That is fascinating. I love it. Cool, dude. So how was week 16 for you? Any just overall overarching thoughts?
Yeah, we sweated the 555 milli again.
Oh, nice, dude.
It was a lesser sweat than some of my others this season. Like I was like top 100 heading into the afternoon with DK Metcalf and who the hell else did I have on that roster? Who were they playing?
Like the Vikings. They're playing the Vikings.
That's right. It was Jordan Addison and DK Metcalf. So they both scored a touchdown in the first half. I'm like, oh shit, like we got a chance here.
Here we go.
Yeah. I made it up to like 50th. And then like they combined for one catch for 2 yards in the second half. It's like, okay, cool.
I felt like that game like just was right on the edge of being just like a complete shootout, but it just like
it needed a spark, and that's what it was missing. So the first half like played to, they combined for like 31 points in the first half. I think it was 17-14.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly.
Right.
Yeah. So it played to something that could have been there. It needed the spark, and the only way with like the setup of that game for that spark to happen was for the Seahawks to take the ball on the opening kickoff of the second half and score, and they just fell flat on their face. And I knew like right then, I was like, okay, it's probably not going to happen today. They traded field goals in the third quarter and then like didn't score hardly at all the rest of the way. So it is what it is. I knew like going into the afternoon slate, I probably needed about 60 combined points between DK and Jordan Addison to ship, because I was sitting at like 150 prior to the afternoon, and I was projecting needing like 210 to 215 to ship. So I probably needed like each of them to go for 102. So like I say I had a sweat. It was less of a sweat because that's probably a 85 to 90% outcome for both of those guys. And for them to do it in the same game would have required that game environment to take off. But we were there, man. Didn't come together again, but we moved forward. And this week is very, very interesting because that like super ultra mega milli maker that DraftKings is running this week, you'll see some OWS names, contributors in that contest this week. So I will be firing. I know Mike will be firing. I don't know about JM. I haven't talked to him about it yet. And then I don't know about Xanamir. But you'll see some OWS names in that.
Dude, it's a big event, man. Like the largest prize pool ever, right?
Yeah, and it's a big event because the buy-in's so big. It's only 3,334 entries. So this is like, it's like in the middle between like small field and like medium-sized field, I would say. Like medium-sized field is typically what we see like the 555 milli, like 4,000 plus entries. The the single entry spy is more akin to like a medium size field single entry. When you start getting to like the double spy, that's where we start getting to like small field, like sub 1,000 entries. So this is kind of like right there in the middle between small and medium, which there's a lot of interesting stuff. We came into tonight, or you and I were talking yesterday, or maybe at the end of last week, I can't remember, about what we wanted to do today, because there was a lot of moving pieces. It's Christmas Eve. There's 3 or 4 different slates on this week. So we came in with the game plan to talk about the Saturday slate. And lo and behold, we wake up this morning and DraftKings hasn't even released the Saturday slate. So
yeah, man, I don't know what's up with that.
we changed gears like 5 minutes ago. And we're going to talk about the Christmas slate tomorrow, which a 2-gamer, this is the only chance where OWS will have opportunity to talk about it on air. So let's do that, dude.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm pumped for it. So you typically like to go a little more high dollar. Should you want to look at like a spy kind of look? Like
let's do the $25, the big one, the Christmas special.
Love it, dude. Yep, Christmas special, $200K to first, and I'll jump in here.
Before we like start looking at the players, we know it's a 2-game slate. I want to talk about like the theoretics behind slate size versus kind of our target and goal. We talked about this on the Slate podcast on Saturday for this previous slate, because it was a very interesting and unique slate from the sense of it was a on the smaller end for a main slate, like not as small as we're going to see this week for the main slate with only 8 games, but that's going to be very interesting too. But when we start, like we had an 11-game slate last week, and there weren't any true game environments once we had Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting that we were like super excited to be attacking and diving into. So there's a lot that goes on when we start looking at theoretically optimal practices versus what we expect the field, how we expect the field to approach a slate.
Yeah.
What we've seen this season, and we've talked about this in the past, is because pricing is so tight, because the game environments, because scoring is down, the game environments haven't been what we've seen over the previous, dating back to the COVID season in 2020. That's where we started to see this decline. Like the scoring was up in 2020, and after that, it's been a steady decline. We've seen an over-reliance from the field on median projections. That's probably has something to do with this like great awakening that we're going through in DFS right now, which is we have the tools. How do we use them now? We're trying to figure out how do we use them. So what we're seeing is the field straying a little bit further away from theoretically optimal practices and depending too much on median projections. That's great for cash games. Like we are looking for median in cash games. We want, because the payout structure defines kind of how much variance we should be willing to accept. In cash games, it is a 1 and 0. You win, you lose. And the payout table is as flat as can be. You win a predetermined amount of money, or you lose. So we should be willing or less willing to accept variance in those type contests. Conversely, if we go to the other extreme, just say the Millie Maker, like these massive field contests that have 250,000 entries per week.
Yeah.
Not every Millie's like that. They've been like 160,000 recently because the prize pool is down to 2.5, but it used to be like $4 million prize pool. That discussion notwithstanding, or that discussion in mind, the more entries that are in a specific contest, the higher score we should expect to need to win that contest, because there is more volume for outlier production to happen. In a similar sense, the more games that are on a slate, the higher score we should think, or we should expect to need to ship, because there are more pure opportunities, and this is just pure statistically speaking, there are more opportunities for 80%, 90%, 95%, 99% outlier output to happen. So with that understanding, the bigger the slate, the more teams, the bigger the contest, it's the sliding scale of risk. And that's what DFS is. It's managing variance. It's manipulating variance in our favor. It's contest selection and pairing our manipulation of variance to the size of the contest and the size of the slate. Now, within that discussion, there's a very, very interesting phenomenon that happens. Because if you look at the score needed to ship like the early only slate versus the afternoon only slate versus the main slate on a given week, the scores needed to ship are actually fairly close. So that would seem to refute exactly everything that I've been talking about. The interesting discussion is, from a theoretical perspective, the score needed to win is what we are targeting, not optimal. So the optimal score, the optimal roster, the score that fits together the pieces of salary exactly right for a given slate, that number is going to be higher.
Yes.
The bigger the slate, the more teams there are, and the more entries that are in a contest. But we know going in that we don't need optimal to win these contests. We're not playing against a computer. We're playing against other human beings. Yeah. And so like, that's where this departure from theoretically optimal practices, game stacking, team stacks, correlation, all these things that we know have statistically backed, proven boosts to expected value, playing a tight end in a primary stack, playing a running back in a primary stack. All of these things have a hit rate that is higher than the field's utilization rate. That is leverage. That is boosting expected value. So we have all these tools in our tool belt, and we see the field straying from those and having this over reliance on median projection. Well, now we can just play the best, theoretically optimal practices and we're generating leverage because the field is using them at a lower rate. So combine all that discussion to where we are right now with this 2-game slate. And this is another a tertiary aspect of that discussion of optimal versus the score needed to win. The smaller a slate, the closer to optimal we have to be in order to win, because there are fewer opportunities for you to fit pieces together in different ways, and that makes it so that you need closer to optimal to win. So that is the reason why you see scores in the early only and scores in the late only come close to scores in the entirety of the main slate. The interesting discussion there from a theoretical sense is, although the optimal score is much bigger on the full slate, it's a bigger slate, and you can theoretically be further from optimal and still win.
Right.
It's simply a small sample size versus the infinite outcomes that are available in this game. That's why we have never seen an optimal roster win a GPP on a main slate. The slate is so big that just numerically speaking, there will not be an optimal potentially for the next 100 years. If you compare this to shuffling a deck of cards, we've used this example in the past. If you shuffle a deck of 52 cards, a standard playing deck, mathematically speaking, statistically speaking, there have never been the same shuffle of a deck of cards in history. It's just the number of combinations is 52 prime. 52 times 51 times 50. It's borderline infinite. So when did poker come into existence? Like the 1800s. And still there have not, mathematically speaking, the probability is greater that we haven't seen the same shuffle of a deck of cards ever. So that's a similar discussion of the score needed to win versus optimal. The more chances you have for outlier production to exist, the further from optimal you can theoretically be in order to win. So while the score needed to win these contests of differing slate sizes, it looks fairly similar on paper. The further from optimal the main slate winner is. So now port that discussion to a 2-game slate. And if we go all the way to a showdown, very often, so 85% of the time, you need optimal in order to win showdown. It's just because the sample size and the total number of potential combinations of players in that game for a then 6-person roster is much smaller than a 13-game slate with 9 positions.
Yeah,
excuse me.
Exactly.
I'm choking on myself over here.
Oh, yeah,
So now we look at this 2-game slate. With that understanding, we know going in, we have to be closer to optimal in order to win. If not, the optimal roster, the optimal combination of 9 players from these 2 games. So knowing that, there are some interesting theoretical components that we must be tracking when this slate is being played, primarily because the games are not played at the same time. So we don't have concurrent games, we have sequential games. And in sequential games, just under the definition of a sequential game in game theory, we're able to make observations at each new step. So we should be looking at our rosters after the first game and saying, how close to optimal is this roster? And doing that on every roster that we put into play, because we get more information and that will influence our decisions for the second game. If we nail optimal, or we project we have nailed optimal, because we won't know, but we project. So say we play 2 players from the first game and we are loaded up on the last game. And we play only Hollywood Brown, and we play only, and this is just an example, we play only Hollywood Brown and we play only George Pickens. Say he makes it back, which I don't know if he does. But it looks like he's a full participant. He's missed 3 weeks. He should be 4 weeks post-injury. He should play if I had to guess. So say we play only George Pickens and only Hollywood Brown, and this game plays to a 17-14 game. And Hollywood Brown goes for like 8 for 90 and 1. He gets a touchdown, and George Pickens breaks the century mark and scores a touchdown. And then like nobody else does much of anything. Like we should go into the second game thinking that we might be on theoretically, or we might be on actual optimal, like an actual optimal path here. The second game, Baltimore and Houston, has clear paths to like developing into a massive shootout type game. So an interesting theoretical aspect of like this entire discussion is I go into these short slates entering duplicate rosters. Yes. So if I do get optimal out of the first game, I want to have more shots on goal to actual optimal from the second game. So if I'm building a roster with only George Pickens and Hollywood Brown from the first game, I'm going to enter it twice. I'm going to enter it twice in the exact same roster, and then I will be able to manipulate that after I have more information. And now my 20 roster portfolio, or whatever it is effectively a 2 roster portfolio, if that is tracking to be optimal. Because we know it's a 2-game slate, we probably need really close to optimal, if not exact optimal, in order to win. And that's all that matters in GPPs. We're just trying to win. So it's a very, very interesting slate, a very, very like, that was 20 minutes on the theory behind like what our goal is on a given slate and why it is important to like take in more information. Like, I don't know the percentage of the field that is going to be doing this on Christmas and looking at the rosters and adjusting their rosters later. It's probably sub 10%, maybe sub 5%. So that is already an edge on these short slates. It's a very similar discussion to Thanksgiving, where we talked about it before, where it's like, it's the holidays, man. Who is taking in the additional information and adjusting their rosters? It's probably a very, very small portion of the field.
Or even if they are adjusting, and they might only have 5 minutes to just quickly be like, okay, let me think this through really fast and just you know, throw a couple different combinations. But if you actually have time, we joked in Discord for Thanksgiving to like plan your bathroom breaks for the holidays, but it's legitimately a boost to expected value in these contests. It is. I may or may not have done that this past Thanksgiving.
Yeah, exactly. I was sick, so like I wasn't adjusting.
Yeah, that's true, man. Yeah, when you're feeling like really under the weather, you just don't have the brain power to make those adjustments. No, but the discussion is an important one, just because, like you said, you have to be thinking about optimal lineups like in this 2-game slate, which is why you want to give yourself all those different chances with the duplication. Whereas on a main slate, it's like you can't, if you try to like somehow get to optimal, which is impossible, you'll just be trying to hit everything, and you need like millions of lineups, obviously. So with this though, it's like billions, you do need to be thinking about that.
Yeah. The number of outcomes in a DFS roster. Say we have a 13 game slate. We know we have to play one quarterback. There's already 26 options for the starters. If we do the same discussion for running back, we have 2 roster spots, and there's probably 30 plus viable running backs on a given slate if it's a 13 game slate. So it's 26 already, and we're only at 3 positions. 26 times 30 times 29, we'll say. And you keep going down in the roster. Now we have at wide receiver, there's 3 wide receiver spots, and there's maybe 48 potential wide receivers that we can play, times 47 times 46. You keep going down the roster. Now you see it is very close to an infinite potential possibilities.
Yeah.
And we just don't have, I mean, DFS has been, DraftKings opened in like 2012, 2009, somewhere 2009 to 2011, somewhere in there. I don't know. So we have like 12, 13 years, if that range is accurate, which I think it is. 12, 13 years times 17.5 main slates, because we just introduced 18-week seasons a few years ago. So it's like we just don't have the volume.
That's
statistically
insane. Yeah, there's
speaking.
only been like 200 to 250 main slates. That's just wild to think.
Yeah,
like
so
how
we don't have
small that sample size is.
We might go 100 years and not have an optimal roster, just statistically speaking, ship a GPP. So it's good to know like what the endpoint goal is, and then kind of reverse engineer what we should like, what should be influencing our decisions for a given slate. If not, you're effectively just throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah. Not kind of playing to the contest size, the setup. I mean, you talk about this all the time, the rules of the game and what kind of, how those different factors influence it. Absolutely, man.
Yeah. So let's talk about the slate real quick.
Yeah, dude. I mean, what do you think? Obviously, like you said, it sounds like you like the Baltimore-Houston game for the potential shootout upside.
Yeah, so that first game is a closer game total, but I would say like the median outcomes in this game are going to be fairly similar. If you look at the game totals, it's 44 points for the first game, and it's 26 or 46.5 for the second game. So we should expect the median outcomes from these 2 games to be fairly similar. That said, if you picture like the total, if we played out the slate 100 times and we charted the game totals, like the how many points these teams combined for at the end of the game, the first game, the Chiefs and the Steelers, would likely be much more concentrated about the median. So if you picture that on a plot, we use bell curves to demonstrate these. The peak of the first game about the median would be much higher, and the more of the outcomes would be more concentrated about the mean. So the standard deviation would be much smaller in the first game. If we picture the second game, the Ravens against the Texans, with all the talent that they have, with the Ravens being so pass funnel, with highly concentrated offenses now because the Texans just lost Tank Dell, it would be much more flat of a bell curve, but much more distended on either side, which means the lowest of lows would be way lower than the first game, and the highest of highs would be much greater than the first game, and the standard deviation would be much greater, and there would be a higher percentage outside of one standard deviation. So on a bell curve, you would get this flat thing that kind of tapers out at the end, whereas in the first game, it would be a high peak or the median. So that's kind of like,
I love that.
That's kind of what leads me to saying like, I would be more interested in that second game. We kind of used it in a working example earlier. So we'll build a roster like that, and we'll build it through the lens of kind of this entire discussion. So I'm more interested in Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud than I am Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson. So that's going to dictate what we're talking about here. If we say that the first game is not going to return more than 2 or 3 like players that would be considered optimal on this slate, now it should narrow like who we are interested in from that game. So I mentioned Hollywood Brown. He's probably not. I mean, he's probably not in that discussion outside of the fact that he's so cheap. I'm looking up his snap rate from last week real quick. Because he just came back from injury. He played 20 offensive snaps, which was a 27% snap rate.
Okay.
Xavier Worthy has been over 80% for 3 consecutive games. So it's more likely that Xavier Worthy would emerge as the optimal player from the Chiefs as compared to Hollywood Brown. The other pass catchers from the Kansas City Chiefs, Justin Watson, 53% last week. He's been between 51 and 56% for 3 games. Juju Smith-Schuster, 36%. So we see that Marquise Brown ate into Juju Smith-Schuster's role more than anybody else in the offense because he went from 55, 56, 49, 51% snaps to 36% snaps. DeAndre Hopkins went from 55, 45, 49. So his role has not been changed really by Marquise Brown. So I would expect Juju Smith-Schuster to be a name that we are not really considering on this slate outside of like extreme variance. So it's most likely to be Xavier Worthy or Travis Kelce. We have a backfield that has been split even more. They parsed it into a 3-person backfield now. Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt are sharing early down work. Samaje Perine is the clear passing down guy. So it's highly unlikely that one of those guys outside of scoring multiple touchdowns is optimal as well. So we're effectively left with Xavier Worthy and George Pickens. So if we want to like play to this is lower variance approach because they represent the likeliest top performers from that game. So if we want to just build something that is adopting less variance, we can just enter Xavier Worthy and George Pickens and say that by doing that, we know we need to be accepting more variance throughout the roster, which we are if we're only playing those 2 players. Because now we're saying I'm betting on the game environment with the wider range of outcomes. That means more variance. So from a theoretical sense, like it makes sense.
I see how you did that. Yeah, I see what you did there. That's good.
Yeah, so we can just say like we'll enter Xavier Worthy, we'll enter George Pickens, and we'll say like this first game just hits median or below. And then we'll accept the more variance on the later game.
I like it, dude. I like it. So so with this later game, do you want to go Lamar here? Do you want to go Stroud? Which quarterback are you most interested in?
I think we need to go Lamar.
Okay, yeah.
And if we go Lamar, we're saying one of 2 things, maybe both happens. We're saying he throws a lot of touchdowns and or he rushes for 1 or 2 touchdowns. So if that's the case, what do both of those do? They're direct like competition with Derrick Henry. So now already we can say like we should not play Derrick Henry on this roster theoretically. And now it can happen that the Ravens score 42 points and there's 6 touchdowns to go around and Derrick Henry rushes for 100 yards and still scores, and he's probably optimal on the slate because there just isn't a lot else. But from a like closer to median and accepting less variance, we would not put Derrick Henry on this roster. But we know we didn't accept a lot of variance earlier, so we are going to put Derrick Henry on this roster.
No, I do like it. I do like it. And it's like, man, who else do you play? Running back is tough on this 2-game slate because, like you said, the Chiefs is just so like split up, and then the Chiefs defense obviously is tough too.
Yeah, so we can either bet on the uncertainty of the Kansas City backfield. We can bet on the uncertainty of the Pittsburgh backfield, or we're playing Joe Mixon and we don't have salary to play Nico Collins. So I side with playing Nico Collins as a potential upside piece from the Texans to get us to a game environment that is better. And that would mean that we're now betting on a split backfield on either the Chiefs or the Steelers. So because we expect Justice Hill to miss, that is also interesting. Like who becomes the pass catching back for the Ravens? So it is probably going to be Rasheen Ali, but he has been more of like an early down back. They're probably also going to have Keaton Mitchell active, if I had to guess. And we're probably going to see Rasheen Ali be the change of pace guy. And we're probably going to see Keaton Mitchell be the kind of emergency dude. The interesting aspect of this is Rasheen Ali has not seen a professional target. So what happens here? It's probably a more robust workload for Derrick Henry. And I think like he saw 2 targets last week, which is like, I think he saw 2. Yeah, he saw 2 targets last week. But it's greater than 0. And that's meaningful for a guy like Derrick Henry. So joke. we probably can't go double Baltimore running back. We probably can't go Joe Mixon because it means that we can't play Nico Collins. So on this roster, we're again, I would side with one of the Kansas City Chiefs dudes, and we're effectively just hunting for a touchdown. That's all we're doing. So is it Isaiah Pacheco? Is it Kareem Hunt? Dude, flip a coin. And this is probably where I would do multiple rosters, and I would say I'll put one on this roster because we have our core here, and I'll put the other on the other, and then I'll make duplicates.
Just trying to guess the touchdown score for the Chiefs running back.
Yeah. I'd expect Kareem Hunt to maybe be the most heavily owned of that. And it is also interesting. We could say Jaylen Warren. We could see the Pittsburgh Steelers fall behind and have to be passing here. But this is a home Steelers game. We don't see a lot of home Steelers getting blown out. So I think we're just going to have to put Kareem Hunt in. But if I'm managing a portfolio, I would probably do this core, put in Kareem Hunt into 2, put in Isaiah Pacheco into 2, maybe even put in Jaylen Warren into 2, maybe even put in Najee Harris into 2.
Love it,
because he's going to have a red zone role.
So the core of Lamar, Henry, Pickens, and Worthy, and then kind of mixing and matching the running backs.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. That's sharp.
At tight end, this is a Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and then everybody else. That interesting aspect of everybody else is Dalton Schultz should see a much greater role in the pass offense. They went out and they signed Deontay Johnson off of waivers. They got a waiver claim. So they added Deontay Johnson. He legitimately joined the team yesterday, and they play tomorrow.
Wow.
So he's probably not going to see a ton of snaps. So now it's John Mechie, it's Robert Woods, it's Xavier Hutchinson. Like, these guys are going to be the guys that are on the field alongside Nico Collins. So what we can do in this roster, and we need to save salary, is play Mark Andrews and Dalton Schultz and see if we have salary. We don't even have a salary to do that. So now it becomes,
we're looking for Nico, right? You want to get Nico in there.
Yeah, Nico's got to be in there in this roster.
Let's see.
So we need to save like enough for a defense. So like 3K.
Nico in there real fast.
And where do we do that? We can do that at quarterback. We can save 2K at quarterback. So that's still not enough. We can do that at Nico Collins, or we can do that at Derrick Henry. So it effectively becomes Derrick Henry and CJ Stroud versus Lamar Jackson and like another one of the backs from the early game. And that is a tough decision.
Tough, man. Yeah, because
if we remove one of Dalton Schultz, Mark Andrews, we still don't have enough salary to make this work. So we're going to have to drop Nico Collins out of this roster.
Dude.
And I would have to replace him most likely with I was going to say most likely with a Houston pass catcher, but I don't know if that's the case. God, it's really tough to not have Nico Collins. No, we're going to do this. We're going to keep Nico Collins. We're going to drop Xavier Worthy.
Okay.
And we still don't have enough salary.
Dude, this is it. Yeah,
it's really tough to play Lamar Jackson with Nico Collins. So we're gonna have to go down to CJ Stroud.
Yeah, that's well. I for some reason I thought CJ was 6,500, but yeah, 6K. No, that's
yeah. So
that's an eye opener though. Just that like it's going to be extremely tough to make that build work without taking just wild punts.
Yeah, 100%. We could also let me see. Isaiah Likely's a little bit cheaper than Dalton Schultz. No, can't do that either. So we'll go CJ Stroud, Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt, George Pickens, Nico Collins, Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz so far. We'll go Chiefs defense.
Okay, what does that leave us?
That leaves us 4,300 for wide receiver, and that's going to be Calvin Austin.
There we go.
So it's correlated, and it's just because it's so difficult to play Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and Nico Collins. Like, you have to make significant sacrifices elsewhere, and there's a little bit more exposure to that first game than we initially came into this thinking we would have, because we have Kareem Hunt, we have Calvin Austin, we have George Pickens, and we have the Kansas City Chiefs defense. So I'd have to. We're doing this for the first. Like, I'm looking at the slate for the first time live.
Same.
So I'm sure there are other avenues to take. This would be more of a median outcome roster as opposed to more variance.
Yeah, and it's like you probably would have to, find a punt. You're just hoping and praying almost. Obviously, it just seems like the Texans offense a lot of times has not been as aggressive as we would like, even though it's clearly a pass funnel matchup. But, it's still, it certainly could work, but totally see what you're saying there. But yeah, other options, but still think
it would have to be, I think it would have to be, to make that work, it would have to be Calvin Austin over George Pickens, and then you can probably make it work.
Okay. Yep. That, I think exactly. I think that's what you'd have to do.
Yeah. Cause then I just built one. If you want, you can
just
tell the people listening this one. All right, we'll throw it up. It's Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt.
Okay. And then Austin.
Calvin Austin, Rashad Bateman.
Okay.
And Nico. Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz, and the Steelers defense.
Steelers D. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so that is effectively now we only have Kareem Hunt and Calvin Austin and the Steelers defense from that first game. And we're betting into the wider range of outcomes from the second game. We have Lamar Jackson with Derrick Henry and Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews, bringing it back with only with Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz.
Exactly. And you're betting on that high end, like you said, with the bell curve outcome of this game to basically take you to the top. So Hilow, great stuff, man. And a couple of different options here. So I like that. For the podcast, the final lineup that we landed on was Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt, Rashad Bateman, Nico Collins, Calvin Austin, Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz, and the Steelers. And I'm not even remembering the one that the other one was CJ Stroud and George Pickens, and then a couple other small changes there. But Hilow, as always, man, great stuff. I love just the theoretical discussion as well. Anything else you want to add, man, before we ship this one off here on Christmas Eve?
I'm tired of talking. That was a lot.
It was good stuff, though, as always. Hilow, have a good Christmas, man. Merry Christmas. And man, hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards. Thanks for the time.
Happy holidays, man.